The fire began on a Tuesday night in March 1993, when most students of St. Aldobrand's University in northern France were already asleep in their dorms. At 2:13 a.m., alarms echoed through the main academic building, a sprawling neo-Gothic structure that had stood for over a century. Flames tore through the upper floors, consuming archives, offices, and laboratories. By dawn, the entire West Wing was reduced to blackened stone and ash. The newspapers called it a tragedy. 5 students were confirmed dead, 2 professors were missing, and dozens were injured. But beneath the official statements lay rumors that had haunted the campus for decades. Survivors spoke of screams that did not sound human, of shadows moving against the fire's glow, and of locked doors that led to rooms no one had ever seen before. Among the most disturbing testimonies came from a young man named Julien Morel. He had been one of the last to escape before the ceiling collapsed. In a police interview, he insisted that he had seen a group of students tied to chairs in the basement, their eyes covered with black cloth, as if waiting for some kind of experiment. His claims were dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations. The official report labeled the blaze as an electrical failure, nothing more. But years later, fragments of Julien's account would resurface. Renovation workers, tasked with restoring parts of the university, uncovered strange findings. Scorched notebooks hidden behind false walls, pages filled with formulas, sketches of human anatomy, and cryptic notes signed with the initials EV. Some of those pages described what they called the threshold experiment. The idea was simple in theory, horrifying in practice. To measure the limits of human fear, to document what happened when subjects were pushed beyond the point of reason. The figure behind the project seemed to be Professor Etienne Valroux, a respected lecturer in psychology known for his charisma and unorthodox teaching. Valroux had vanished during the fire and was assumed dead. But the recovered notes suggested otherwise. They hinted that the professor believed fear itself was a form of energy, something that could be harnessed if one knew how to extract it. In the years before the fire, students had whispered about his late-night lectures, the way he selected certain pupils for special assignments. Some of those students had dropped out without explanation. Others were never seen again. Julien's story, combined with the recovered notes, began to reshape the way people viewed the tragedy. What if the fire wasn't an accident? What if it was the final act in an experiment gone too far, an attempt to erase the evidence of something monstrous? Late in 2007, a journalist named Claire Duret took up the case. She had grown up in the same town, and her older brother had been a student at St. Aldobrand's during the 90s. He disappeared one winter night in 1992, a year before the fire, and her family was told he had left school for personal reasons. Claire never believed it. Now, 15 years later, she was determined to uncover what really happened in the shadows of that university. And the deeper she dug, the more she began to suspect that the fire had not ended the story. It had only buried it alive. On her desk sat a single recovered photograph from the ruins, a blurry image of a circle of chairs in a dark room, chains bolted to the floor, and faint chalk markings on the walls. At the bottom corner of the photo, barely legible, were the words, "Fear is the purest truth." Claire would soon discover that the university still held secrets that refused to die with the flames. Claire Duret arrived in the small northern town of Saint-Valois on a fog-soaked morning in November 2007. The air smelled of damp stone and wood smoke, the kind of cold that clung to skin and reminded her of winters she had spent as a child. The town had never truly recovered from the closure of the university after the fire. Shops had shut their doors, pubs grew silent, and the once bustling campus had been reduced to a half-restored shell. Her first stop was the municipal archive, a gray building where records of the fire were stored. Claire had arranged to meet an archivist named Baptiste, who had worked there since the early 1990s. He was a frail man with deep lines etched into his face, and his hands shook as he placed a box of files on the table. "These are the official records," he said, his voice low. "But you won't find what you're looking for here. Those pages were rewritten to protect the town. Or perhaps, to protect someone else." Claire leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Baptiste hesitated, glancing toward the door before lowering his voice. "The fire wasn't an accident. I was here when it happened. We all heard things, screams from the lower levels, explosions that didn't sound like electrical surges. But most of all, there were whispers before, warnings not to go into the West Wing at night." He opened another folder he had hidden beneath the official files. Inside were yellowed photographs taken during the cleanup. One image showed a basement corridor choked with soot, the walls covered in what looked like carved symbols, circles, triangles, and words in Latin. Another photo depicted a burned notebook page. Written in jagged script were the words, "Threshold achieved. Subject collapsed. Fear extracted." Claire's stomach tightened. She traced the name scrawled beneath the entry, Evalru. Before she could ask more, Baptiste pressed the folder into her hands. "Take it. But be careful. Some people don't want these things uncovered. They'll silence anyone who digs too deep." That evening, Claire rented a room at the Old Inn across from the university grounds. From her window, she could see the blackened tower of the West Wing looming against the fog, its windows like hollow eyes staring back at her. Unable to sleep, she walked toward the ruins with a flashlight. The campus gates were unlocked. Renovation had halted years earlier due to lack of funding, and the silence was suffocating. Inside, the halls smelled of mildew and charred wood. Her light caught something carved into the stone of a stairwell, a faint inscription that read, "Experior ut vidium," Latin for "I suffer to see." The deeper she descended, the colder the air grew, as if the building itself were holding its breath. At the bottom of the staircase, she found a heavy metal door welded shut. Rust streaked the frame, but in the center of the door was a strange symbol, a circle intersected by jagged lines. Claire lifted her camera and snapped a picture. The flash illuminated the symbol, and for a split second she swore she saw movement in the reflection, like a face, pale and gaunt, staring back at her. But when the light faded, the door was still. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. It was an unknown number. She answered, whispering. A distorted male voice spoke, "You're looking for your brother." Claire froze. "Who is this?" "They took him below. You won't find bones. You won't find graves. Only what's left when fear is stripped away." The line went dead. Her flashlight flickered, then went out entirely. In the suffocating dark of the ruined university, Claire realized she was no longer alone. Footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor, slow and deliberate, moving toward her. She forced herself to stay still, her heart pounding in her chest as the sound grew louder. Whoever, or whatever, was there did not hurry. It was as if it already knew she had nowhere to run. The air was suffocating in the pitch-black corridor, heavy with damp stone and the faint metallic tang of rust. Claire's breathing quickened, her pulse hammering so hard she thought the sound itself might give her away. She pressed herself against the cold wall, straining to hear. The footsteps drew closer, steady, unhurried. Whoever it was didn't stumble or shuffle. They moved with certainty, like someone who knew every corner of this burned-out ruin. Claire fumbled in her pocket for her lighter. A small flame flickered to life, casting an orange glow over the corridor. The walls were coated in soot, and beneath it, faint carvings emerged, symbols scratched deep into the stone. Circles interlocking, runes that seemed older than the building itself. And there, at the end of the hall, stood a figure. Tall, gaunt, shrouded in the darkness, its features blurred by shadow. "Lucien?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The figure tilted its head, then stepped forward. The light revealed a man in torn clothing, his face half-burned, lips cracked and blistered. His eyes reflected the flame, black, glossy, inhuman. Claire gasped and stumbled back. The man raised a trembling hand, pointing at her. His voice rasped, barely audible, "Don't open the door." Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the lighter's flame sputtered and died. When she relit it, the corridor was empty. Shaking, Claire fled the ruins, clutching the folder Baptiste had given her. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those eyes, shiny and dark, as if something inside had hollowed the man out. The next morning she returned to Baptiste's office. But when she arrived, the archive was surrounded by police tape. A crowd had gathered, whispering in hushed tones. Baptiste was dead, found slumped over his desk, his eyes wide open, his throat slit cleanly. Claire's stomach dropped. Had it been a coincidence, or had someone silenced him because he had helped her? She told herself she needed to leave Saint-Fauvoir. But something held her back. The phone call, the voice that had spoken of her brother. Lucien's disappearance had never made sense. Officially, he died in the fire. But she had never seen his body, never received his belongings. Just a cold letter from the university saying he'd been lost. Claire spent the afternoon poring over the hidden photographs again. One image caught her attention. A group shot of the psychology faculty in 2006, taken months before the fire. Her brother, Lucien, stood in the back row, smiling awkwardly. Next to him was a tall man in a lab coat, his expression severe. At the bottom, a name had been typed, Dr. Auguste Carrière. Claire searched online. Carrière had been a rising figure in experimental psychology. His papers focused on fear response and sensory deprivation. His work had been controversial, Rumors of unethical experiments, whispers of human trials. After the fire, his name had vanished. That evening, Claire met with an old bartender who had lived through the fire. Over whiskey, his hands trembling, he whispered what people in town still dared not say aloud. They used the students, he said. Those professors, they built rooms below the West Wing. Black rooms. They locked kids inside, filled the air with gas, noises, shadows. They said fear could be measured, bottled like blood. Claire's stomach churned. Why? The man's gaze dropped to the table. They weren't studying it. They were feeding it. Before she could press him further, the door of the bar slammed open. A man in a dark coat entered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. The bartender froze, going pale. The stranger's eyes scanned the room. Then they landed on Claire. He didn't speak, didn't blink. He simply raised his hand and drew a finger slowly across his throat. The bartender hissed in her ear, "Get out. Tonight. Or you won't leave at all." But Claire knew she couldn't leave. Not until she discovered what had truly happened to Lucien, and what still lurked in the ruins of Saint Valois. Claire barely slept. Every sound outside her hotel window, the barking of a stray dog, the low hum of a passing car, made her flinch. She kept seeing the man's gesture in her mind, the finger drawn across his throat, the unblinking stare. By dawn she had made a decision. If Carrière and his colleagues had been experimenting on students in the West Wing, then she had to find proof. Not just rumors, not just whispers. Something solid. She returned to the ruins with a flashlight, rope, and a recorder. The police tape still fluttered at the entrance, but she slipped past it. The morning fog wrapped the campus in silence. The air inside was worse this time, colder, thick with the scent of ash. She forced herself to retrace her steps through the scorched hallways, down toward the basement. And there, hidden behind a wall of collapsed bricks, she found what looked like a metal door. Rusted, dented, but intact. It took her nearly an hour of prying and pulling before the door groaned open. A rush of stale air poured out, stinking of mildew and something chemical. Claire covered her mouth with her sleeve and stepped inside. The corridor beyond was different from the ruins above. Unburned, preserved, like it had been sealed away from the fire. The walls were smooth concrete, lined with pipes and wiring. She flicked on her recorder. "My name is Claire Durand," she whispered. "I am inside the restricted West Wing of the University of Saint Valois. This area was hidden behind the fire-damaged walls. I believe this is where the experiments took place." Her voice echoed unnaturally, as though the walls themselves were listening. She passed door after door, each marked with a number. Room 12. Room 13. Room 14. She peeked inside one. The chamber was small, with steel restraints bolted to the floor and a chair at its center. The walls were covered in black paint, and dozens of speakers were embedded in the ceiling. On a table sat a reel-to-reel recorder, its tape broken and spilling onto the floor. Claire shivered. She imagined students strapped into that chair, subjected to hours of blinding lights, distorted screams, endless shadows. She moved on. In room 16 she found a wall scratched with fingernails. Words gouged into the paint. "He's watching. Don't close your eyes." The further she went, the worse it became. Some rooms had cages. Others had stretchers with leather straps, needles still scattered on the floor. In one she found a stack of notebooks, damp and moldy. She flipped through them, her heart racing. Entries were written in messy, hurried handwriting. Day 27. Subject has stopped responding to auditory hallucinations. Increasing dose. Day 45. Subject 6 no longer speaks. Only stares. Eyes dilated, unresponsive. Day 61. Subject begs to be put back in the dark. Claims he sees the hollow man when the lights are on. Claire slammed the notebook shut. Hollow man. The word stabbed through her. Was that what the burned figure had been warning her about? A low hum filled the corridor. She froze. It was faint, mechanical, like a generator flickering to life. But this building had no power. Slowly she raised her flashlight. The lights overhead were trembling, buzzing faintly. And then, music. A warped, distant melody seeping from the speakers above. Old, crackling, like a child's lullaby played on broken vinyl. Claire's throat tightened. She backed away, her breath fogging in the cold air. From the end of the hall, a door creaked open. A shadow spilled across the floor, tall, elongated, wrong. Claire turned and ran. Her flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of faces carved into the walls, their mouths open in silent screams. The music grew louder, echoing through the underground maze until it was everywhere. She stumbled into a larger chamber. Rows of monitors lined the walls, their screens cracked but flickering to life with static. One by one the static shifted into images. Not images of the past. Images of her. Grainy black and white footage of Claire running through the halls just seconds earlier. Footage from angles no camera could possibly have captured. Her legs nearly gave out. Someone, or something, was watching her. Recording her. The static warped again. The screens showed her brother Lucien. His face pale, his eyes black like pools of ink. He opened his mouth. And from every speaker, in a voice that was his and not his at all, came the words, "You shouldn't have come here." The chamber plunged into darkness. Claire screamed. The scream tore from Claire's throat, swallowed instantly by the suffocating dark. She fumbled with her flashlight, shaking it until the beam flickered back to life, dim and weak. The chamber was empty. The monitors were off. No Lucien. No shadow. Only silence, so heavy it pressed against her eardrums. She forced herself to breathe. "It's in your head," she whispered. Just like they made them hear things. Just hallucinations. But even she didn't believe it. She stumbled back into the corridor, her recorder still running, her voice frantic now as she narrated every step. "There are recordings of subjects. Not human anymore. I've seen the rooms. I've seen," she froze. Footsteps. Not hers. Measured, deliberate, echoing down the hall. She killed the flashlight instantly and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. The steps grew louder, closer, dragging slightly as though one leg didn't quite work. She could see nothing, but the darkness seemed thicker ahead, a moving shadow deeper than all the rest. Her throat went dry. She forced herself to crawl along the wall inch by inch toward the exit. But the corridor seemed endless, stretching farther the more she moved. The humming in the air returned, the same mechanical buzz she'd heard before, and the warped lullaby bled back through the speakers. This time the voice was different. A chorus, dozens of overlapping whispers chanting the same phrase. "Stay in the dark. Stay in the dark. Stay in the dark." Her body shivered violently. She stumbled through another doorway and slammed the door shut behind her. The small room she'd entered was lined with shelves, files, reels, old medical boxes. Claire's flashlight beam shook as she scanned the room. On a desk in the center lay a single reel-to-reel tape labeled Experiment 72, Final. Hands trembling, she threaded it into the recorder and pressed play. The tape hissed before a man's voice crackled through. "Come. Professional. Cold. This is Professor Carrier. Subject is unresponsive to stimuli. The introduction of Compound 6 has resulted in irreversible psychosis. Shadows have been reported to manifest independently of light sources. Subjects describe a figure they call the Hollow Man. At this stage, we are no longer observing hallucinations. We are observing infection." Claire's stomach dropped. The recording continued, the voice breaking slightly. "Once seen, he spreads. Containment is impossible. Our only hope is eradication. If this tape is found, burn the West Wing. Burn everything." Her flashlight flickered and went out. The whispers swelled, pouring from every wall, every shelf. She dropped the recorder, scrambling in the dark, her fingers clawing at the shelves as if they could hold her steady. And then she felt it. A hand, cold, bony, wrapping around her wrist. She screamed again, pulling free and bolting for the door. The corridor outside was alive now, walls crawling with shadows that stretched and twisted like living things. They reached for her as she ran, clawing at her clothes, tugging her hair. She could see the faint outline of the metal door ahead, her only way out. The lullaby slowed, warped, until it was a single deep voice whispering directly into her ear. "You've seen me now. You can't leave." Claire threw herself at the door, clawing it open, bursting into the ash-filled ruins above. She ran through the burned hallways, through the foggy campus, not daring to look back. By the time she reached her hotel, her lungs were raw, her body trembling with exhaustion. She locked herself inside, collapsed onto the floor, and sobbed until no tears came. But even there, in the safety of her room, the shadows seemed wrong. The corners darker than they should be. The mirror across the room reflecting something just a fraction behind her movements. And as she pressed play on the recorder again, desperate to prove to herself she hadn't imagined it all, her blood ran cold. The tape no longer carried Carrier's voice. It carried her brother's. "You shouldn't have left me, Claire. He's here now. With us." The tape clicked off. And from the corner of her room, something shifted. Claire didn't remember blacking out. When her eyes fluttered open, she was lying on the cold hotel floor, her recorder beside her, the tape spinning though no one had touched it. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, but the room still seemed unnaturally dim, as if the shadows had grown thicker overnight. She sat up slowly, every muscle stiff, her mind replaying the words she had heard, her brother's voice on the tape, his black eyes staring from the screens. It should have been impossible. Lucien had died 2 years ago. Her phone buzzed weakly on the table. She lunged for it, hands shaking, dialing her editor in Paris. The line crackled, barely connecting. "Claire? You sound— What happened?" "I found it. The experiments. They weren't hallucinations, they were trying to make people see something that was already there. Something real. It's spreading." She froze. Behind her, the mirror shifted. Her reflection didn't move when she did. It just stood there, smiling. The phone slipped from her hand as the reflection slowly lifted a hand and dragged a finger across its throat, just like the burned man in the ruins. The gesture she couldn't forget. Claire stumbled back. The reflection stayed, lips moving silently, forming words she couldn't hear, until the sound came not from the mirror but from inside her own head. "You're one of us now." The shadows in the room lengthened, stretching toward her feet, climbing the walls. The air turned heavy, suffocating. She snatched the recorder, slamming it off, but the whispers didn't stop. They were in her ears, her chest, her pulse. Frantic, she tore open the curtains, desperate for sunlight. The city outside was wrong. The streets of Saint-Valois were filled with people, but none of them moved. They stood frozen, heads tilted back, eyes black as Lucien's had been. And as one, they turned toward her window. Her scream never left her throat, because in the glass she finally saw him. The hollow man. No face. No eyes. Just an endless void where a head should be, his form towering, skeletal, draped in shadows that moved like smoke. And as he stepped closer in the reflection, Claire realized the truth. Lucien hadn't died. He had been taken. And now so had she. The last thing she heard before the glass shattered inward, swallowing the room in darkness, was her brother's voice whispering softly, "Welcome home."